Today's topic is fruit tree pruning and training. I'm going to share information along with a few assignments. This session is recorded, and you will get a link to recording and all the resources mentioned in this presentation. Should there be any problem with delivery, feel free to contact us by email, and we'll be happy to remedy that. These are just a few of the university publications that I used to prepare this talk. No worries, it will be included in the email. So this is the game plan for today. We're going to begin with a few key ideas like apical dominance and pruning cuts, talk quickly about characteristics of a strong framework. I'll walk you through how to train young trees into different forms and how to renovate a mature tree, and then save the bulk of the time to talk about how to prune common fruit trees. I want to thank Bruce Nelson, Master Pruner, for reviewing this talk. Let's begin with apical dominance. It is the work of auxin, a group of growth hormone that concentrates at the tip of a stem. Its job is to inhibit the shoots below from growing. Auxin moves by gravity, and its effect is the strongest in the vertical branch, moderate at an angle, and almost non-existent in a horizontal branch. The two main pruning cuts are heading cuts and removal cuts. Removal cuts sometimes are also called thinning cuts. Heading cuts remove a portion of a branch. When the auxin and a portion of the branch is removed by a pruning cut, the rest of the branch will begin to grow, and as a result, the plant will become bushier. In the removal cut, we make the cut of the entire branch at its point of origin, and as a result, we make the plant more open and thinned out. When we remove a thick branch, do it in 3 steps. First, make an undercut about a foot away from the joint, and then move toward the stem, along the stem for about 4 to 6 inches, make a through cut to remove the weight, and then you come back and make a clean cut. And I'll come back in the next slide to say a little more about this cut. But before I go on, I want to debunk something that we used to tell you. Years back, we would tell you to make the cut at a 45-degree angle. That has changed. Instead, you should make the cut straight across perpendicular to the stem. And if you made a correct cut, your wound should be round and not oval. And this publication gives you a little more detail. So going back to making the final cut, this is an example of a trunk and a branch. We'll begin with the branch bark ridge, which is formed by the bark of the trunk pushing against the bark of the branch. From the branch bark ridge, if you move toward the stem, in this tree, you see a slightly swollen area, and that's the collar. Collar is an area where there is rich energy reserve and the chemicals that will slow the decay. So it's a good practice to make a cut that will preserve the collar and not injure it. So this is your first assignment. Walk around the neighborhood, locate at least 3 different kinds of trees, and I want you to do 2 things. First, try to find the collar. The previous example I show you, the collar looks kind of swollen, but collars look different in different trees. So don't assume it should just look like that. But it is a region that looks slightly different from the adjoining areas. In addition to finding the collar, I want you to find some pruning cuts that were made before and assess how good they are. So a good pruning cut should be made in a way that it will allow the tree to seal or close the wound. And this cut is in the process of closing, and this one is completely closed. In order to make a good cut, well, let's be clear, every cut is a wound, and every wound will lead to injury. So, and research has shown that the size of the cut is proportional to the area of the internal decay. So, in order to minimize the rot from a cut, we want to cut to the collar where we can. We want to begin fixing a tree when the tree is young, because in a smaller, younger tree, most likely the cuts are smaller and therefore less injury. And a third thing about quantity is there is such a thing called the pruning budget. Over the course of a year, your total amount of pruning should not exceed 1/3 in the foliage that's removed. The exceptions are anything that's dead, diseased, or damaged. They don't count in the pruning budget. All right. Fruit trees need a very strong framework in order to support the abundant fruit production. And the three components of a strong framework are branch angle, branch placement, and branch length. So let's take a look at placement. If you look from the side, you should see vertical distance between where the branches join the trunk. And they should ideally be 8 to 24 inches apart, the vertical gap. And this is to minimize competition. If you're looking downward, you should see the branches connected to the trunk like spokes of a wheel. And this 360-degree arrangement will maximize the access to sunlight. Branch angle is strongest 45 to 60 degrees. Narrower or wider are not as strong. And finally, with old fruit trees especially, the branches just get farther and farther away from the trunk. And the fruit load is usually at the tip of the branch, and that creates a problem for breaking branches. The weight cannot be supported, so they will need to be shortened. Now, every tree has a particular shape that it naturally will grow toward. So apple will like to grow into a central leader. They tend to be taller, and the fruiting wood usually are along the perimeter, and that's where they get sunlight. If you take a central leader, remove the top, you get a modified central leader. But keep in mind, all trees can be shaped into an open center form. And the open center form tends to grow wider and lower. And that is much easier to manage in the home orchard, and that's what we recommend. So if you want to train your young tree into a central leader form, this is how you do it. Let's pretend we're starting out with this young tree from the nursery that has three closely bundled shoots near the top, and then there are four lower ones below them. What do we do? If we want a central leader, we just want one leader, and that means out of these three, two have to go. And when we look at the lower branches, we can see they are really close together. There's not sufficient space between them. And in order to get the vertical space, we'll remove the center two and keep those two that are number 1 and 2. And so this will give us a decent vertical distance and a single leader. And in order to encourage branching, we want to tip back where we make a little heading cut in all three, and that will stimulate growth. And a year later, our tree may look something like this and continue the process over a few years, and we may end up with a framework like this. I mentioned earlier that any fruit tree can be trained into an open center form. And this is an apple tree that had the process that I'm going to describe next. And now it has open center form. So if you want an open center tree, you begin with your bare root web. You make a heading cut anywhere 18 to 36 inches above ground. The heading cut is going to stimulate branching below that cut. And we come back at the end of the first year, and our tree may look something like this. And the first winter, we'll come back and do a little cleaning up, remove the downward facing branches, and the ones that are grown toward the center will be rubbing against others. And repeat this process a few years, and we would end up with an open center form framework. Very often, my experience is the tree may have enough branches, but they're not pointed toward the right direction in order to give me that 360-degree coverage. So we can train them, and it's pretty simple. If you want to redirect a branch um, toward a different area, a different direction, you simply drive a stake into the ground in the direction you want. You tie the branch to that stake, and the branch will, you'll be amazed, will just move toward that direction. Another issue is I talked about the branch angle is best at 45 degrees, and often we get an angle that's just too narrow. And you can use these spacers, which you can buy commercially, or you can use something that's homemade. And by using these, you can improve the branch angle. If you don't want to use this, you can just tie a string to a branch, weigh it down with something, and that will pull it down a little bit and widen the angle also. I think the most important thing about training is not so much what you use, but keeping in mind you want to train the young branches because they're most pliable and they respond well to training. And um, you want to do it in the way that you're checking the result every month or so, and remove the training tool as soon as you get the result. I've seen a lot of fruit trees that have the training tools left alone for years, and the young branches have really thin bark, so they tend to get damaged on the surface, and this can lead to really undesirable results on the fruit tree. And I did a short video, maybe a 5-minute one that you may want to watch for the steps involved in training. Okay, let's make sure we share the same understanding of these words that I'm using. When I talk about the framework of a fruit tree, I mean the trunk and those main branches that come off the trunk. These are primary scaffold. And then from the primary, there are secondary scaffold. So the trunk and the scaffold are basically the structure that support the fruiting wood. And your fruiting wood are generally where there is light. So it will be the exterior layer of the tree, not in the center. Um, and they're usually called lateral or shoots. And let's go on because I'll be using these words and again and again. All right, if you're just beginning, I recommend reading this book because this book will show you how to make a tree that's really compact. You don't get as many fruits, but in a home orchard, that may just be a good thing for you. So the three main ideas are begin with a bare root whip and make a severe heading cut, which we've talked about in how to give a tree an open center form. And then the third thing that's different we did not talk about is summer prune only for size control. And this author recommends shortening shoots by half to 2/3. I know this sounds really drastic, but um, the result is you end up with a very compact tree. Now, many of us have fruit trees that have been let go for a long time, and they have just gotten so tall and become a challenge. So, if this is the issue, what you can do is cut off the top branches like this illustration shows. This will allow you to reduce the height, and removing this big portion of the canopy will allow the lights to come into parts of the tree that used to be in the dark. And where lights go, there may be new growth. So we're going to get new shoots where we make the cut and also in other areas. And this over time will allow us to move the fruiting wood lower into the tree. It's important to remember you don't want to cut more than 1/3 over the course of a year. So if you make these cuts um, in the winter, you can expect to have lots of vigorous responses where you make the cuts come spring. And if you do this in the summer, you may end up with maybe some sunburn of foliage and fruit. So you have to have a plan to deal with that. And the cuts that I showed in the previous slide for a size reduction is called a reduction cut, and that's different from a removal cut. A reduction cut involves removing the upright, more vigorous portion of a branch where the two branches come together. So like this. While a removal cut removes the smaller branch where two branches come together. Another difference is the removal cut. Remember we talked about collar to protect a cut from rotting? Well, in a reduction cut, there's no collar there. And so it's a kind of cut that we want to be more cautious in using. So quick review, heading cuts remove a portion of a branch to make a plant bushier. Removal cuts take out the entire branch to make the plant more open. And reduction cut removes the upright portion of a branch to redirect the growth and slow the growth. All right. Well, what if you have a mature tree that has been neglected? Well, you can renovate it. Essentially, what you do is reduce the height and width and thin the canopy in order to allow light penetration into lower parts of the tree. This is easier said than done, trust me. It takes usually 3 to 5 years to complete, and it really should be done only to healthy trees. If you have a tree that's sickly, very weak, it's probably not a good candidate, and it does carry the risk of tree decline. I always think of this kind of renovation work as 3P. It's patience, because it takes many years. Persistence, you have to have a way to just keep coming back, even though the in between years the tree can look really horrible and will offer you no encouragement whatsoever. And it requires a plan. That's the third P. You have to have a game plan and stick with it. So now you might think, okay, so that sounds good, but how do you really do this? Well, a team of master gardeners, I'm part of it, undertook exactly this. We found a number of old mature apple trees. They're over 20 years old. They were about 24 feet high to start out. They had very poor framework and very low production, and the fruits were way high up and out of reach. So the way to do this is you have to prune in the winter and summer. And and remember, it's multi-year. So this is essentially what we did in the first and second winter. And I'm going to walk you through this. The stick drawing shows kind of a portion of a tree that we worked on. And remember, what we're doing is reducing the height in order to allow better light penetration. So This stick drawing shows roughly what we had in a part of the tree's canopy, and these orange lines represent roughly where we made cuts. And this second drawing shows roughly what the tree looked like after we are done pruning. As you can see, it's not beautiful, but you can also see very clearly this is lower and there is much less of the low hanging, downward hanging branches, which are not productive. So overall, the framework has changed. It is lower and it's more open. The thing we had to do was come back in the summer to deal with all the water sprouts and other shoots that resulted from all of these drastic cuts and essentially removed most of them, if not all of them. And so the second winter, our starting point is a framework, something like this. And we continue the process of making more cuts. And I hope by now it's pretty clear that the approach is continue to lower the main framework and make cuts in a way that will allow better light penetration and stimulate new fruiting wood. Okay, so that's what we did in the winter. What about the summer? Every summer we came back to prune. And summer pruning is best done when majority of the branch have set a terminal bud. A terminal bud is a big fat bud at the tip of the shoot. And it varies with different trees. So we kept checking, and in August, most of the shoots had a terminal bud, and that's when we did the pruning. And this is what you do. This is the Currenier shoot. If you look at it at the base, you'll see sort of a random looking cluster of leaves and in a sort of like a whirl. And then as you move toward the tip, you count one, two, three, leaf or bud, and then you make the cut just above three. And then you're done with that shoot. So that was what we did every summer for the 3 summers. And the good news is after we've done this over 3 years, winter and summer, these trees have developed a much better framework. They have more production and the fruit have moved lower into the tree. All right. So by now, I hope you realize the age of your tree's framework is really not that important. Good pruning will stimulate and renew the fruiting wood, and we can move the fruiting wood in the parts of the tree. And that means that we need to know where these fruiting woods are. Depending on the kind of the tree, fruits can grow on shoots. There can be long shoots and short shoots and spurs. And they can be distributed laterally, meaning along the shoots and spur, or terminally, meaning at the tip of the shoots and spur. So this is what it looks like. On this apple branch, you can see some long shoots and some short shoots, and you can see some spurs. And the close-up of the spurs look like this: apple spurs and plum spur. So if you're not familiar with spur, just think of them as super compact shoots. You take a shoot and you squish, you know, 3 feet of distance together into 6 inches, and you got a spur. And now that we know what shoots and spurs look like, we need to be able to age them. And I want you to take a look at this photo here. It's a shoot, and there is a sort of different looking thing here called bud scale scar. And that's formed when the new growth begin, the season. The new growth begins as a bud, a terminal bud, and that bud is protected by a bunch of bud scales. It sort of works like a blanket to help it through the winter. When growth begins, the blankets fall off and the bud scale remain on the branch, and it becomes a really useful marker. So this branch here, this is last year growth, 1-year-old growth. There's a scale scar here, and then 2-year-old wood bud scale scar here, and then 3-year-old and 4-year-old, etc. So when you look at this example here, which side, left or right, is younger wood? If you said left, you'll be correct because the newer growth is always darker in color, looks prettier, and has thinner skin. So your next assignment is look at your fruit tree, find the bud scale scar on both the shoots and the spurs. And I'd like you to practice aging your shoots and spurs. All right, now we're ready to prune some trees. I want to thank Mike and Jane Collier for opening their home orchard where I took photos for this talk. And we'll begin with apples and pears. Apples and pears fruit mostly on spurs and tips of short shoots. So, and the short shoots become productive when they're 2, 3 years old, relatively young. And the good news is the spurs are really long-lived. Okay, we prune an apple tree before and after. We begin with the framework, looked at the scaffold structure, 360-degree coverage. Does it have it? Is there anything we need to do to remedy? Is there a good vertical distance? Are they at the 45-degree angle in the connection? And what are we looking for when we prune? We look for overlapping branches where they should be adjusted so they're not shading each other. We look for crossing branches because they can rub against each other and cause damage. We look for suckers. These are the little vertical growths coming from the rootstock. We want to take them out. And we look at the fruiting branches to see if some of them are so far away from the trunk that they're no longer well supported and we need to shorten them. After the framework, we look at all the shoots, and these are the portions that the growth from last year. And there are two kinds of shoots. The first kind are the really scary ones, super vigorous and vertical. We call them water sprouts. In general, you want to remove just about all of them. The ones you keep, you can cut it to one bud and hope to maybe stimulate a spur. And you can also keep some in areas where you want to develop some new fruiting wood structure. And those you keep, you want to bend them to encourage them to become more productive and fruiting. So the non-water sprout shoots, there should be many also, we make a decision based on how strong they grew last season. If they're moderate, if they grew less than 10 inches long, we would keep them. If they grew a lot last season and are really vigorous, we want to cut them to a few buds. And you can cut them to 3, 4 buds. It kind of depends on how much is already right there in that same area and how much space is available. In general, when we look at all of the growth from last year, the fruiting shoots or laterals, we're removing roughly 20% for our apples and pears. And when we're done the pruning, they should be spaced about 7 to 9 inches apart. And this is a good test to make sure that there is not too much competition. Okay, I mentioned apple spurs live a long time. They live 8 to 10 years. And the best thing we can do for them is reduce the overhead shade. And if you have, like this one, it's grown in probably almost full sun and it just looks really vigorous. Well, the ones that look weak are probably grown in areas that's too shady. So in addition to removing the shade, you can also just remove the tip of the spur and see if you could not rejuvenate it. And I've mentioned earlier, we can encourage new spurs by heading back some of the shoots and bending a branch. Thinning, fruit thinning is a very important part of a fruit tree management, and that's something that people don't do often enough. Um, it's important because about 70%, 70, of a fruit tree's annual energy reserves are used by fruit. So if we don't thin fruit sufficiently, you may see these problems. The tree may suffer from broken branches because there is too much fruit load and weighing down the branches. You may have a tree that you may have a branch where there is so much fruit load, it pulls down the branch angle and messes up your tree's framework. And you may also end up with something that's called alternate bearing. And alternate bearing is one year you get a huge crop, and the next year you get hardly anything. So in order to have a steady annual production, fruit thinning should be part of the fruit tree management. And there are two ways to do it. You can shorten the fruiting branches like is shown in this picture, use removal cuts, and that will take away the fruiting potential of the branch. And in addition, you still need to come back and look at the fruits, um, usually in late June, when the fruits are about the size between a dime and a quarter. And ideally, they should be 6 to 8 inches apart. And in a cluster of fruit, you should save only one. Well, what if your apple is grown two-dimensionally as an espalier and not three-dimensional? Well, the approach is pretty similar, but you will prune in the summer. And when you look at this illustration here, it is sort of like this portion of the espalier. So we have a main branch, and then we have a bunch of shoots. You'll find some really vertical, vigorous shoots. They're sort of like the water sprouts. You want to take them out totally. And then you'll find some other shoots that are more moderate in their growth. If they grew directly from this main branch, like these, you want to cut it back to allow roughly 3 to 4 buds. And if they're branched like this or this, that means that they have been cut before, and the new shoot is coming from a branch that grew in previous seasons. You want to cut it to only one bud. And you also want to thin fruit because in apples, research showed that you need roughly 30 leaves to support a fruit. So in espalier, it's even more important to make sure that the number of leaves and fruits will stay in balance. All right, let's go through the same process one more time with the Asian pear, before and after. Look at the framework, fix the overlapping branches, crossing branches, the fruit wood that's too long. And indeed, we have a fruiting wood, a branch that was too long away from the trunk. So we made a cut here to shorten not only the branch, but also reduce the fruit load. And the spurs in Asian pear will produce 6 to 8 years, so that's great. So again, prune to improve access to sunlight, renovate the old spur, and stimulate the new spurs by heading back shoots and bending the shoots. When you look at the shoots here in this picture, you can see there are a lot of water sprouts. And remember what we do with them? Basically, remove all of them except for where we want to encourage spur development, cut to one bud, or where we want to form a new addition to the fruiting framework, we'll bend it over and train it over a few years. And then the rest of the shoots, by the angle of the shoots and how much they grew last year, we decide what to do. If they have moderate growth, we keep them as is. If they had fairly vigorous growth, we'll shorten them to 3 to 4 buds. Okay, by now you're an expert with pruning apple and pear, right? Oh, don't forget fruit thinning. So with Asian pear, you want to thin to 6 to 8 inches apart, or one fruit per flower cluster. I know the tendency is to keep more than one fruit in a flower cluster, but trust me, if you keep one instead of two or three, you'll get better quality fruit and far less problem with pest and disease. All right, let's move on to some other trees. Cherries, they fruit on spur and along short shoots. Look at these gorgeous looking spurs. There are slight differences between sweet cherry and sour cherry, but both of them have spurs that can live a long time. I think the most important thing about cherry pruning, at least for people who live in the Pacific Northwest area where winters are wet, you want to prune in the summer because that's the easiest way to avoid pathogen problems. And you want to avoid major cuts bigger than 2 inch in diameter because uh, they may not heal well. And again, we're removing roughly 20% of last year's shoots in pruning cherries. So this is a cherry tree we pruned the before and after. I know you probably can't see very clearly what we did, but this is what we did. Okay, so we opened up the center some with some pruning to improve the framework. We shortened and removed some of the long shoots, and we look for crossing and downward facing branches because they're not productive. You know, they're in the middle of the tree and so low down where they're not going to get any light and therefore no fruit. So not really major pruning, but the after pruning picture shows something that's a little cleaner, more open. We did make a reduction cut in the cherry, which is right here. And remember, the reduction cut is a way to reduce the height. Okay, plum and apricot, they fruit on spur and along short shoots, kind of like cherry. They also should be pruned in summer to reduce disease issues. Now, within this group, there are differences. The European plums are not nearly as vigorous as the Asian and American. So the amount of pruning and fruit thinning will vary. And apricots are would need harder pruning than the plums. So this is an Italian plum that we pruned. We removed basically the crossing and overlapping branches to improve the framework and shorten some new shoots to 2, 3 buds. Not a whole lot of work. While I was pruning this tree, um, I thought it would be helpful to take a picture of the framework from down below. So this is climbing, well, this is kind of getting in toward the trunk and looking up toward the sky. And as a reminder that if you're just looking at your tree from the perimeter by walking around it, sometimes you're not able to judge exactly where there are canopy areas that overlap for shading. And this is just looking at it from another angle is a helpful thing. Okay, peaches and nectarines, totally different from the previous group because they fruit along long shoots and they fruit on 1 year old wood. And what does this mean? Anything that's 2 years old or older is just the scaffold, it's just a support for your fruiting wood. And this means pruning should be really heavy. We're removing 40 to 60% of last year's shoots. And then the shoots we keep, we want to shorten them quite a lot. So in the end, we should have no more than 3 to 4 fruit per branch. And the fruits should be 5 to 6 inches apart. And there's a good video from North Carolina State on pruning a peach. I highly recommend. Persimmon. I love persimmon. So persimmons, they fruit current season growth from 1-year-old wood. What does that mean? All right, so this is 1-year-old wood, which means it grew last year. You can tell because it's darker in color. All right, if you just kind of estimate along this entire shoot here, there are probably what, 7, 8 buds. If I don't do any pruning, spring comes, growth begin, and many of these begin to have new shoots develop from the bud. And remember, the new shoots, the current season shoot, is where I get fruit. This branch can be carrying, I don't know, 10 to 20 persimmon. That's going to break the branch. So the important thing is you have to head it back and looking at the attachment and the size of your branch and decide how much you're going to keep. I'm probably going to shorten this to maybe 3, 4 sets of buds. Figs, I know a lot of people have figs, and fig pruning is really easy in our area because you get 2 crops, 1 crop along 1-year-old wood. That's the wood that grew last year, and another crop along the new wood that grew this season. This is what you do it. In the winter, before growth begin, look at all of your shoots that developed last year, okay? Select half of them, just cut to 2 buds. So you cut it short, you're going to stimulate new shoots to develop, and those new shoots will bear a crop of fruit late summer, early into fall. And the shoots that you leave alone are going to have the fruits that set already during the winter, the previous season, and that will be your first crop, and it should be available in early summer. Now, the thing is, the weather will determine the size of each crop. So, if we have a really cold winter, your first crop could be damaged and will be smaller. And if we have a short summer instead of a really long summer, your second crop may not ripen. I know a lot of people have super vigorous fig trees that are out of control. And the good news is you can use radical renovation on a fig tree. You simply cut it down to 2 feet or even lower. And as the new shoots begin to grow, you just select the new shoots to grow a new tree. So to summarize, in fruit tree pruning, we want to pay attention to framework. In the winter, we are developing and correcting. We also want to pay attention to shoots and laterals. That's where the framework is the support structure, and shoots and laterals is where our fruiting wood is. And we want to do the majority of shortening and removal in the summer. And we also need to pay attention to the fruit load by shortening the fruiting wood and thinning fruit. Okay, I hope by now you have a pretty good idea of fruit tree pruning. And I want to end with this one slide, which basically tells us that there are so many exceptions and different ways of doing things in the natural world that just when we think we understand how to prune a fruit tree, and all the trees that we've talked about are deciduous. So they follow the same growing cycle, winter dormant, spring growth, summer fruiting, fall harvest, and then winter dormant again. One growth spurt in one growing season in the 12-month period. But citrus is totally different because they're evergreen. They grow year round as long as the soil temperature is above 50 degrees. and they go through multiple growth spurs in one growing season. The good news is we know the fruit form at the tip of new wood, which means this season's shoot at the tip, you can expect to get a fruit. So how do you prune a citrus if you have a Meyer lemon that's growing in a container in the Pacific Northwest? Well, you prune to maintain a general shape and to limit the height so you can manage the tree. If you live in the frost-free area and your tree is growing year-round, you can prune any time of the year. It doesn't matter. But if you live in our area where the tree is really doing the majority of growing from spring to late summer, um, then it's different. You can prune between spring and late summer. That's okay. But keep in mind, if you prune in the spring, you're going to remove the fruiting potential. And if you prune in late summer, you do not. And the thing about citrus is because the fruit is at the tip of the new wood, you want to harvest with your pruner, cut that entire shoot with the fruit at the tip to the next bud. So you're harvesting and pruning at the same time. And with that, I hope you're so impressed that you will want to check out all of these resources um, and learn more about fruit tree pruning because the more you learn and read about it, the easier it comes. These are the university resources and some books and articles. I think I'm ready for some questions.
Hey, Sherry. That was really, really good. I learned a lot. I
Hmm.
learned a lot about my fruit trees today. We did have a question. There was a little bit of confusion. You know how you were talking about making a flat cut instead of an angled cut when you're trimming the tree? Well, this person had a question about when you are trimming off a large branch and you're trying to avoid the branch collar, won't the angle be a little bit more at an angle and not exactly flat?
Uh, I've made a lot of pruning cuts in trees, and usually it end up with it being a circle and not an oval. Usually, if you made an oval cut, that means that your angle is not quite right. But
Oh,
uh,
okay.
but if you but the important thing is you need to cut to preserve the color.
Okay. Whether it's at an angle or straight, depending on what the branch looks like, just make sure
Yeah,
you don't cut into the collar.
yeah.
Okay, great. Um, we had a lot of
I,
questions
I
about
can
what
see that.
tools to use. Looks like the
Oh,
sun's shining.
yeah, that's too much sun. Okay.
Yeah, people are kind of confused, or they just want some information about what tools to use, and is it when and if they can use power tools also?
Mm. Okay. So power tools are really great if you're able to manage it in a way that you can make the precise cuts that you need. I
Okay.
know when and the hand tools, the benefit is you're able to have more control of exactly where you want your cut to be and what angle you want it to be. So it's kind of a compromise. And when we were um, renovating the mature apple trees, we did not use power tools. We actually climbed a ladder to use hand tools. And that's because when we were making those cuts, we did not want to make a mistake with a power tool and in the location, especially where we want to, if we want to make a reduction cut specific to a certain part of the tree, it's really difficult in my experience to be able to have control over a power tool and do that.
Okay. Okay. We also had a question about, you did talk about espaliered trees. They want to know, how do you thin the fruit? How do you control the amount of fruit that you're going to get on an espaliered tree?
Yeah, fruit thinning to me is just the most gut-wrenching, difficult thing. You know, you see this beautiful fruit and you picture what you can, how you can benefit from it, and then, somebody said, no, no, it's too many fruit, you should take some off. But in general, when you're thinning fruit, you basically are either picking it off if it's really small with your fingers, or you're cutting it off. And you should do it ideally when the fruit is the size of a dime to a quarter. If you do it too late when the fruits are already really big and well formed, they've already sucked the energy from the trees. So the fruit thinning is not really benefiting the energy reserving the tree anymore. The tree is already overextended. Um, does that answer the question? So
Yeah, yeah. And then you also, in your talk, you also talked about how far away to
how
allow the
far apart?
buds.
Yeah.
Yeah, yeah,
Well, in Espalier, that the distance between the shoots is different from a regular tree.
right.
In a regular tree, we want fruiting wood, the shoots, to be for apples, 7 to 9 inches apart. Pears, 6 to 8 inches apart. So in general, that is a guidance for minimizing the competition and minimize the shading. But in Espalier, it's a totally different structure, so the rules are different.
Okay. Okay. Um, this person had a question about her fig tree. You did talk about radical pruning on a fig tree. She has a 10-year-old fig tree. Its trunk is not very big. It's only about 6 inches in diameter. But the first branches, she has three branches, but they're 6 feet up. And she'd really like the branches to be about 4 feet down. So is there anything she can do without radically changing it to bring some branch, get some branches a little bit lower?
Well, I cannot think of a way to move a 4 foot high branch down below, so without
Mhm,
making a lower cut, because
mhm.
essentially your new branches, the lower branches will come below where you make the big cut. Maybe what she can do is, did you say that branches are 6 feet?
Yeah, the branches are 6 feet. She wants them at 4 feet.
Ooh. If the branches join the trunk at 6 feet above the ground, that's too high.
Yeah, yeah,
That's too high. I mean, fig, they bear fruit on 1-year-old wood and the current season wood. So I would not hesitate just doing a severe cut to, 2, 3 foot above ground, get a bunch of new sprouts or shoots and rebuild the tree. And, in a year, you're getting fruit
okay.
already.
And what time of year should she do that?
If she makes that severe cut, she should do it in late winter, early spring when growth is ready to start. And
Okay.
she should definitely water her fig tree the first season.
Yeah,
I mean, this sounds crazy because usually fig trees are so vigorous, you don't really have to worry much about them. But if you do such a severe cut, you really need to take good care of it the first season and, give it every advantage that's possible.
yeah. Okay. Um, this lady has a lot of suckers coming up from the base of her tree, and she continually has to cut them down. She wanted to know if there's anything else she can do about all these suckers coming up.
Well, I'm wondering if she cultivates at all in the root region, because that's one reason that will stimulate sucker growth, a damage in the root. Um, Another possibility is maybe when she cuts her suckers, she should dig down a little bit and make sure that she's cutting them as low as possible,
Right,
where they're coming from.
right.
Because if you did not cut the entire sucker, it's not a clean cut. Basically, you're doing a heading cut, and so you're just encouraging more sprouts to come from that cut.
Okay.
Yeah.
Okay. And we got a couple more questions too about columnar, pruning columnar trees. I like, what's kind of the deal with how you do them? Because they're just straight, they're just vertical.
Yeah. The those trees are great. The the main problem is they can eventually get so tall that you can't reach the top. So if you want to keep your tree in a columnar shape, you're going to have to bring in the side branches. Your framework has to be contained in a way that will essentially allow the tree to keep the form. So that's one thing. You have to pay more attention to your scaffold that goes sideways and make sure
Mhm.
they don't get too long. The second thing is I know, I mean, this is not recommended, but I know a lot of people have problem with a columnar tree that gets so tall that essentially you have to top the tree. So you have to, make a big cut in the top in order to control the height.
Oh,
Um, so, usually the the if the tree has a particular form, the pruning, you'll follow the same general rules, but you will prioritize over the shape of the tree over everything else.
okay. Okay. And the last question is, you talked a little bit about, but they're kind of confused about what you mean by bending a shoot and
Oh, okay.
how do you go about that?
Yeah. If you go back and look at the training slide where I talked about training tools to widen the angle, and I also said if the shoot is not pointed the correct direction, you can tie it to a stake in the ground. Okay. And then another thing I said is if you have a shoot that has a narrow crotch angle, let's say, and you want it to have a wider crotch angle, you can just tie a string to it and weigh it down a little bit with something, a water bottle, a weight, container, anything. And over time, that shoot will just become shaped like this instead of this. And when the shoot, remember that picture that show oxen and how oxen work? It's I said that oxen works best when the shoot is vertical, and if it's at an angle, then it's moderate, and if it's flat, it doesn't hardly do anything. So our goal to have productive fruiting shoot is to have our fruiting wood to be at 45-degree angle.
Right.
The vertical stuff, water sprouts, get rid of them. Not productive. If they're at an angle, great. If there are too many, if there are not enough of them at an angle, that's productive. Take some of the vertical ones and bend them down. Turn them into something that's at an angle, and it will become productive.
Sounds great. That's all we have. There were a lot more questions, but our staff was really good about answering all those questions. So thank you, Sherry. That was great.
Well, I think two things. One, want to thank everybody who supported this webinar because we know we always get a lot of questions and we have a wonderful team of master gardeners who are supporting answering the questions. Wonderful. And if you did not get an answer that's sufficiently clear for your situation, just feel free to email 10-Minute University. The email address is in your Zoom confirmation. Make sure you send a picture and clear description. And I'd love to practice with all of these examples that you will provide me. So with that, I hope everybody will come back for growing blueberries next week.